Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Well, let's hope this has been a great week for you. I am amazed that I was able to fit everything on my list into it, and I hope the same is true of you. Thanks for your continuing reactions, by the way. I wanted to say that. An online show like this one and the podcast that emerges every day from it take a very long time to grow. But after 2 months, I can say that we have, and we are. The thing about what I do with the Sherman Report, and it's true of thousands of others creating webcasts, is that we have to be producer and director and editor and host and technical operator and technician and still get the coffee. No complaint, just a morsel of fact about this work. Thanks for finding the Sherman Report and for making it part of your day. Stephen Ledrew and I mix it up a bit today. Can you believe there's a member of parliament with a private member's bill that would make it illegal to downplay or justify the Indian residential school system? There are a lot of people and a lot of views out there about everything. Many are out of their minds, but they're allowed to be. While we have freedom of expression, I will always stand up for it. But I can't imagine anybody trying to outlaw freedom of expression, and that's what this is. Stay tuned. I take a look at the Bloc Quebecois and its ultimatum to Justin Trudeau, the American too close to call election, and the Western countries pushing for a 21-day ceasefire in the Middle East, which of course Israel has correctly rejected. That's coming up today on the Sherman Report. Back in a moment.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
I've come to love when Friday rolls around. We get to review the wacky week that's coming to an end, and to assist with that, no one better than Stephen Ledrew. Let's bring him on. Stephen, I hope you're doing well. Let me just say, a regular contributor to the Sherman Report, a lawyer, a politico, a broadcaster, and a terrific interpreter of events in our purview and also in our rear view. Welcome to the program again.
Thank you very much, Peter. You're very generous in that. I'll try and live up to it.
Well, we've been friends of a sort for many years now. Look, let's start with something that I know is sticking in your craw, and it certainly is. It's bemusing me, befuddling me. I don't understand. There's an MP. She's from Winnipeg. Her name is Leah Gazan, and she has tabled a bill which, as they say, if passed, and it never will be, would make it illegal for the new crime of downplaying or justifying the Indian residential school system. So she created this bill because of, I don't quote, increasing residential school denialism. And to me, this is insanity. And it's not because of any belief on my part, but because what she wants to do is end freedom of expression and even freedom of thought on a subject that is really important to Canada. I mean, if you could do that, Holocaust denial would be illegal. Belief that the Israelis were responsible for October 7th would be illegal. Belief that the Russians didn't start the war in Ukraine would be illegal. Maybe belief that there is a ridiculous social party in Canada called the NDP would be illegal. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it could come down to that. I call this authoritarian progressivism. I'm going to tell you what you should believe. And if you don't agree, I'm going to try to send you to jail. And it's not just what you said at the outset. There's no chance of this passing, Peter. And you're right, as a parliamentarian, a private member's bill, you know that is going to have hardly any chance to pass. However, she's not the first person to do this. There have been Liberal senators who have put forward bills like this. So if you have the NDP and the Liberals feeling the population at their neck, they may just very well pass this to make it illegal. And it's not just to talk about, everybody knows there are residential schools. We aren't talking about denying residential schools. We aren't talking about denying that there were some abuses in them. What people are saying, and I hear this, I've done some shows on this, is that at least $260 million of taxpayers' money has been sent to Native groups. and to exhume bodies, to provide proof or disproof that all of these thousands that you find on Aboriginal radio, they say 6,000 kids were murdered, slaughtered,
Yep.
and that they were buried without any service, without any regard to the families.
Not even a marker.
That is absolute baloney. Where I live, I have, as they call themselves, Bush Indians, Indian friends. I've talked to them about this. They wish that their elders would either deal with it or shut up, because they say, or some of them have said, that the prime minister uses this to get votes. All he does is bring disrepute onto Indians when he goes out to Kamloops, where there's not one body has been found, and kneels with a teddy bear in his arms. They say that this is just, we are being played. But our elders are getting paid a lot of money for it, $260 million each. But then when you have parliamentarians doing this, that's what's happening wrong in our country. It's just progressivism. As the prime minister says, he doesn't ever say he's not a liberal, but he's not. He's a, quote, progressive. I know better than all you unwashed out there. And you and I, Peter, are in the unwashed, according to him.
Oh, we're filthy. Hey, I admit it. No, it's not true. I mean, the bottom line is I'm willing to listen to any claim by anybody, and I'm not based on race or color or any of those non-defining characteristics other than appearance. I'm willing to listen to any claim, and I'm willing to accept if you can show me proof. And what bothers me here is not whether or not the things that have been stated as having taken place in residential schools did or didn't. What bothers me is there's somebody that says, you can't not believe this. You can't. And I'm going to make it illegal for you not to believe this. Well, if you open that door, you want to talk about the door to hell. You're opening a door in a country to making it illegal to think certain things. And I'll never accept that.
Well, I mean, that is a closed society, and you're right not to accept it. I think most Canadians would never accept it, but our leadership is accepting of things like that because they want to have control over the unwashed. When our prime minister,
but most people at this point, Stephen, know that our leadership is a cabal of morons. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also morons wanting to stay in control. And our prime minister at the UN this week signed on to a UN proposal, not in the mainstream news. You won't hear much about this in the mainstream news. A UN proposal to have an international law dealing with, countries, having, countries all abide by this laws that they're going to bring up. Now, the Western countries will sign on to that. The rogue countries like North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, they are going to sign on to that. All we're doing
That's like climate change. Go to hell, they say.
Yeah. So, I mean, we our leaders like to keep us this way. Trudeau will do anything to stay in power. And this is one of the things. Have some thought control, have some control over discussion. And if you don't think the way he thinks, you're going to go to hell. But before you go to hell, we're going to put you in jail. It's a dangerous thing.
I don't get it. We can beat this thing up. Well, we both know it's never going to pass. But I think the reason we wanted to talk about it today, and I think I'm speaking for you when I say this, is it is inconceivable that a duly elected member of our parliament would even attempt to control people's thinking. People can think whatever they want. That's the way it's going to stay. Let's move on. In terms of thinking, we're guided often by journalists. The Liberal Party, in what it has suggested is an effort to keep fair journalism alive, pays publications and other news operations, outlets, just to keep them alive. What does that say about this Trudeau government? And what does it say about journalism in Canada generally?
Journalism in Canada has diminished. It is just no longer really a profession for the most part. Witness CTV News this week crafting together, taking snippets of other pieces and putting it together and saying this really happened. And they later on, when they knew that the gig was up, they apologized. But that was CTV used to be one of the greatest journalism outlets in this country. Now it's just a bunch of pawns. They do that because,
Well, there's nobody there anymore.
well, there's no one
Not
there.
to
There's no one there. The executives of Bell, which owns CTV, Bell and Bell Media, paid themselves $36 million 2 years ago in bonuses. They fired 1,000 people. They took out hundreds of millions of dollars of government money, and they paid themselves those bonuses. And journalism suffers as it goes along. I mean, they need to get the money from the government. There's a story last week in the article, well, column in Ottawa, and you know this. It's called Hill Times. It is a little newspaper to uncover scandals. A Liberal senator didn't like a story, got onto them, made them change it, and they changed it willingly. Why? Because they get $1 million from the Liberal government, and they didn't want that to suffer. I can tell you other stories of where Liberal MPs have written to outlets and said, you remember, you guys are being paid by this government, so don't you be critical of us. That is what's happening in this country. Again, authoritarian progressivism. They want everybody to go the way they are, and if you don't like what we're saying, we'll cut off the money, which is why it's important. Independent shows like mine, like yours, Peter, like others, some independent newspapers that aren't being paid government money to survive, because otherwise we're going to have the thought police all over this country, Peter.
Well, I pay my own money to survive on this show. I don't know if one day it will monetize. That's not a complaint. It was a decision that I made. But I think if the government of Canada said, well, we'll pay you to keep it on, I don't think I could take that.
No.
And I can't understand how anybody does. Just to clarify, what Stephen's been talking about here with CTV, if you have missed it, is they took a piece of videotape of Pierre Poilievre speaking, and they basically spliced it electronically to another piece of videotape to effectively make Pierre Poilievre look like he was speaking a contiguous sentence or thought that meant something entirely different. And they've since apologized. And as I understand, they've fired 2 people, which means they've probably fired a third of their staff. I'm being facetious, but I mean, they've cut that thing to the bone.
Well, they have cut to the bone. And the wording I saw, that those people were no longer in their jobs. It doesn't mean they're no longer at Bell Media.
I guess your point is taken. Anyway, let's move on to what I was just going to move on to, and time is always the enemy here. Hezbollah and Israel. This is in the news constantly, every single day, and they were presented during the week with a 21-day ceasefire proposal signed by, let's just say, all of the major Western nations. Canada was in there, the USA, UK, Australia, and others. And so they're signatories, and Israel has said flat out no. And my question to you is, why do you suppose Israel, and I can ask you this because I'm Jewish, why do you suppose Israel and Jews are not permitted to go into battle in the eyes of others when they are attacked? Because I watched a bit of Netanyahu this morning as I was preparing to do this show, and he was speaking at the UN. Typical of the United Nations, he addressed a mostly empty room because they walk out on people they don't like, and they sure as hell don't like Netanyahu, and they don't like Israel. And he basically says the fight is going to keep going, and it'll keep going until there's a win. In fact, I'll play you a little minute of it, and you can comment.
And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning.
There you go. Now, you know where I come from. I totally admit my bias. I've been raised on an Israel that is exactly as old as I am, and I've been brought up to revere it. It's not the country that I have my allegiance to. That's Canada, but it is a country that's in my heart. And I think most Jews feel that way. So we know what my comments are going to be. You're not Jewish. What do you think when you hear this and when you see what's going on?
Israel is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. It is the only country that is under the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of either a benevolent dictator or a tyrant. And so when you're dealing with Hezbollah, which is a paramilitary terrorist organization that went into Lebanon because Lebanon did not have a civil government worth speaking of, and they've taken over there. When you're dealing with Hamas, which has taken over Palestine because the Palestinians were incapable of running their own governments, these are terrorist organizations. And as you say, pointed out so well, Peter, they started at first, not only years ago, but they started this recent one on October the 7th. And I saw a horrible video of, it was just last week, of another incident of that October 7th attack and what these animals were doing to a young girl. And it's unspeakable. And it's unspeakable that we would have parliamentarians like Elizabeth May standing up in the Canadian Parliament this week, yesterday, the day before, screaming and shouting and saying Israel must be stopped. Israel is not the aggressor here. It is Israel is under attack. And it's interesting how the progressives in our society are gaining the ascendancy, and they don't understand the difference between right and wrong, between an attacker and a defender. And they say, oh, yeah, but Israel is shooting into Lebanon. Yeah, that's because we're all, I don't know, you probably know this, Peter. I don't know how many hundreds of missiles have shot out of Lebanon just across into Israel.
Thousands.
In the last few months. I mean, if Israel didn't defend itself, and Israel didn't have the Iron Curtain, the Iron Dome over there, Israel would not be existing right now. It would be.
What? I'm gonna try to summarize with one line, and I wish I had thought of this. It's not my line, but it's been heard before. If Hezbollah and Hamas and other affiliated groups laid down their arms, there would be peace. If Israel laid down its arms, there would be nothing but dead Jews. And we can't tolerate that. It really affects people here. I can tell you I'm one of them.
Peter, not just Jews. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and I have a lot of non-Jewish friends. It affects everybody who is a believer in the rule of law, and a believer in fairness, and the believer of a world where you have a right to defend yourself when attacked. And if you're the attacker, shame on you. But Israel's not the attacker. And what we have these progressives saying in our country is that Israel's the attacker. They don't know the facts. If we had open dialogue, if we had debate, if we had a news service in Canada, which did not have headlines like the Globe and Mail had this week, the first headline, Israel executes or assassinates Hezbollah official. It makes it sound like Israel is the attacker. Hezbollah has no officials. They're all thugs and terrorists. I mean, so there's the Globe and Mail. I mean, Israel has a tough, Jews have a tough uphill battle these days. But I hope they win, because otherwise these authoritarian progressives are going to ruin our country and the world civilization. Rip it down. All it's been built up the last 2,000 years.
I believe that's their end game, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. Stephen, we're over time as usual, but you and I could talk for an hour. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.
You got that. See you later, Peter. Cheers.
Right. Take care.
You're with the Sherman Report, daily news commentary, live at 5 p.m. Video version live at X, YouTube, and Facebook. Here's Peter Sherman.
I want to talk for a few moments of several signal events of the past week. The Bloc Quebecois, first of all, which is a Quebec-only party, that occupies 33 all Quebec seats in the Parliament of Canada. That makes it third to the Liberals and Conservatives in tonnage, greater than the NDP. And if the polls are correct, they stand a chance of, in the next election, becoming what is known as His Majesty's Loyal Opposition in the Canadian Parliament. When you think about it, there's nothing illegal about that. The men and women of the Bloc were duly and legally elected in a province of Canada called Quebec by Canadian voters. But it sticks in my craw that we could ever see them as working on behalf of His Majesty or being loyal to Canada. Their very existence is seen to the procurement of as much as they can get for Quebec. And they support ultimate sovereignty for Quebec. By definition, the sovereignty part would, in my view, make them anything but loyal to the king or to the country. The leader is Yves-François Blanchet. Blanchet sought to take advantage of the Trudeau Liberals' weak position following the end of the support and confidence agreement that has seen the NDP keeping the government alive for the past 2.5 years, but no more. So the Bloc has come up with an ultimatum. The Bloc wants the government to pass Bill C-319, which would raise the old age security, or OAS, by 10% for those aged 65 to 74. The government has already hiked OAS payments to seniors aged 75 and older, and that was in 2022. Leader Blanchet also wants the government to pass a Bloc private members bill, C-282, which would exempt supply-managed farm sectors, dairy, poultry, and eggs, from any future trade negotiations. Well, dealing with the latter first, if we sit down with whatever new administration assumes power in the United States in about 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and if they want dairy and poultry and eggs to be on the table, what difference is a law like that going to make? We need to trade with the Americans. So we would have to do some negotiation and change some of the rules. As for raising old age security, might be fair, and I speak as a beneficiary of that, but it might be unsustainable financially to extend raises to people aged 65 to 74. Besides which, many of them, and it would have included me a couple of years ago, but these days are still working and are still in great shape. My view is that everything can be open for discussion, but sometimes, even at one's peril, the answer has to be no. Let's see if Trudeau has the stones to do that. Moving on onto the favorite subject of all American aficionados, the current election, and many Canadians, for some reason, don't expect me to tell you who's going to win. The polls, which have proven untrustworthy by and large in the past, have shown that it's entirely too close to call. The news media latch onto them every day and turn molehills into mountains. I still support Trump. I've said that before and I'll say it again, but not to be argumentative or what some would call a Trumper. I just think that in the world we now happen to be co-passengers on, a strong and proven leader beats someone who has steadfastly supported the Biden government as vice president over the past 4 years. Trump, in the meantime, just met with Volodymyr Zelensky of the Ukraine earlier.
So we have a very good relationship, and I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have. Oh, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango.
Okay, he was saying takes two to tango. Don't care for Trump's personal demeanor? Well, I got news for you. Neither do I. But this has a lot to do with who can nullify deep state, which is frankly the swamp that Trump had always sought to drain. And deep state is trying pretty much everything it can to see to it that Harris emerges victorious, because the nameless people who truly run America know that their control would be maintained under Kamala Harris and decimated under Donald Trump. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, read up on deep state. Do your research, do your homework. Here's Harris saying that equity for the disadvantaged is required when natural disasters like what's happening or happened in Florida, the hurricane, occur.
It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so women. Absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities and do that work.
As of now, every set of numbers I look at shows margin of error leads by one or the other in one swing state or the other. In other words, you're taking your best shot in guessing. Since the swing states, so-called, usually create the election outcome in the United States, they remain exceptionally important. The United States only has two parties that really matter versus we here in Canada and many other countries, but in Canada where the NDP and the Bloc and the Greens truly do have some impact, often a lot of impact, on our ability to form workable governments. Not so the United States. And I believe that the margin will be less than 2% between winner and loser in the U.S. election. 5.5 weeks to go, too close to call. All right. One last subject I want to deal with, and we started to talk about it with Stephen Ledrew earlier. A significant grouping of Western countries, many Western countries, issued a joint statement earlier this week calling for a ceasefire immediately, lasting 21 days, to attempt to cool tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, located as it is mostly in Lebanon. Personally, I cannot believe that my own country, Canada, is a signatory. I'm going to read the statement. And for the record, the signatories were the United States, Australia, Canada, the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and Qatar. Here's the text. The situation between Lebanon and Israel since October 8th, 2023, in other words, the day after Israel was attacked and murderous and awful crimes committed against over 1,200 people, their lives taken, since October 8th, 2023, is intolerable and presents an unacceptable risk of a broader regional escalation. This is in nobody's interest, neither of the people of Israel nor of the people of Lebanon. It is time to conclude a diplomatic settlement that enables civilians on both sides of the border to return to their homes in safety. Diplomacy, however, cannot succeed amid an escalation in this conflict. Thus, we call for an immediate 21-day ceasefire across the Lebanon-Israel border to provide space for diplomacy towards the conclusion of a diplomatic settlement consistent with UN Resolution 1701 and the implementation of UN Resolution 2735 regarding a ceasefire in Gaza. We call on all parties, including the governments of Israel and Lebanon, to endorse the temporary ceasefire immediately, consistent with UN Resolution 1701 during this period, and to give a real chance to a diplomatic settlement. We are then prepared to fully support all diplomatic efforts to conclude an agreement between Lebanon and Israel within this period, building on efforts over the last months that ends this crisis altogether. And that's the end of the statement. So now my comments. Israel has correctly refused. Israel has been part of my life for all of its existence. I would criticize Israel if I felt it were deserved. What has happened to Israel since the very day of its independence would never be tolerated by any other country. Israel has fought so many battles and endured so many medium and large unprovoked attacks that there finally had to be a comeuppance. when over 1,200 Israelis were literally slaughtered and burned to death by Hamas terrorists and others who invaded Israeli territory last October 7th, it became obvious that Israel decided it had endured enough. Without that Hamas attack, there would never have been any war today. There is never going to be a two-state solution offered repeatedly by Israel because no one on the other side has ever wanted it, and they don't want it now. They want every Jew dead. I'll say it again. They want every Jew dead. They want the historic land of the Jewish people to go away. They want that land for themselves. It won't happen. Here's a piece of the garbage that we Canadian Jews and non-Jews of good faith have to put up with in our very own parliament. This is the Green Party's Elizabeth May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on the same point, it's clear that world leaders have been calling out for the last year since the horrific attacks of October 7th for restraint and to control the conflict so it doesn't spread as it just is spreading into Lebanon. And we know who the enemy of peace is. Unfortunately, he has a name. He's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And he has put his political career and his...
Well, that's about enough of that. Now, is that or is that not a ridiculous display of non-thinking on the very floor of our own House of Commons? That kind of thing can be witnessed around the world, unfortunately. Listen to me. Jews stopped marching to their deaths as directed by others about 80 years ago. It will never happen again. And Israeli defense power sees to that. No agreement, no ceasefire, eliminate the enemy. That's it, and that's all. And that's the Sherman Report. For Friday, September 27th, have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to The Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.